So I've been following the space for a while, and it's been really interesting to see it develop. Like, first you have this breakthrough in technology. It's any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. We don't understand what its limitations are, so we think it can do anything. So then people are making these ridiculously overreaching products on top of it that everyone gets all excited about, but they're like flashy demos, right? I feel like I'm watching the ecosystem slowly start understanding like what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks.
What's up, party people? This episode is brought to you by our new friends at Lolo Code. Lolo Code lets you build cloud-agnostic serverless apps that make it too easy to go from 0 to 1. If you're familiar with building serverless apps, you can think of Lolo Code as your backend with a visual editor to let you think and build at the same time. No servers to worry about. This is serverless. And I'm here with Gabor Naj, software engineer at Lolo Code. Tell me, Gabor, what gets you excited about Lolo Code for developers?
So Lolo Code is sort of all about the mentality of reducing the threshold and the pain of getting something from having an idea to actually having something in production. I think that a lot of developers that I know and that are out there know the sort of frustration of having an idea and wanting to prototype it, and it being a pretty difficult process of actually getting from, okay, I have an idea, and actually having a stack, having code, having deployed into a cloud or whatever. It takes quite a bit of work, and Lolo really focuses on minimizing the effort required for that process to actually take place. It's a low-code environment built for developers, so that actually means that you get to visualize the different nodes and the data flows between them in your application, which kind of makes the whole process of prototyping and the whole process of sketching out the architecture and getting a better understanding of what it is that you're actually building and how the whole thing functions much easier to understand while you're actually developing the application. So instead of having to spend hours with a whiteboard first, you can actually sit down and start sketching out your application by creating these nodes and creating these links between them while you're actually already doing the development work.
Very cool. Thank you, Gabor. So Lolo Code is built for developers. Try it free today. No credit card required. Check them out at lolo.co/JSParty. Again, lolo.co/JSParty.
You're listening to JS Party, a weekly celebration of JavaScript and the web. Connect with us on the socials. We're on Twitter at JSPartyFM and Mastodon at JSParty at changelog.social. Thank you to our friends at Fastly. JS Party ships fast globally because Fastly is fast globally. It's as simple as that. Check them out at fastly.com. And to fly.io. Deploy your app servers and database close to your users. No ops required. Learn more at fly.io. Okay, it's party time, y'all.
Hello, JS Party people. Welcome to today's episode on a fun, very relevant online topic of the day. We're going to be talking about generative AI. I say that 3 times fast. Generative AI. I'm K-Ball. I am your host today, and I am joined by 3 of my favorite panelists. First off, Amelia Wattenberger. Amelia, hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you. So excited to talk about generative AI.
We are excited to have you here. I think you are probably the foremost expert here, which means you'll talk the least, but the things you say will be super valuable.
Oh, no.
Next up, we have Amel Hussein. Amel.
Hey, Happy New Year, everyone. Happy to be here.
Happy New Year. Happy February. We're already in February.
I know, but it's like my first recorded podcast of 2023, so I had to say Happy New Year, K-Ball.
No, it's good. It's just blowing my mind that the year is already, a 12th of the way done, and it feels like we just celebrated. All right, and then the one, the only, Nick Nisi.
Hoi, hoi. I know it's February, but I get these regular phishing attempt emails at work that are like generated by some company that we pay to try and trick me. And they just announced that it is time to sign up for Secret Santa. And that was the phishing attack. So it's February. it's time for Secret Santa. Woo. I don't know. Maybe they should use a generative AI to figure out when to send proper things that might actually trick me.
Maybe they already do, and that's why they came up with Secret Santa. Well, that feeds us right into our topic. Thank you, Nick. And I think we should just start for those who maybe are a little bit less online and not as plugged into all of the craze of the moment. What even is generative AI? I don't know. Amelia, is that something you could take a crack at defining?
I've learned that the more you say here, the stupider you sound, at least for me. I actually don't use the term generative AI a lot. So as far as I understand it, it's any machine learning model where you give it some input and it gives you different output, but that could be totally wrong.
This is good that we're clarifying this because the title of the document is generative AI, and I'm like, what does that mean? Is that the AI that I've been using every day and that we hear about in the news every day? Is that like, GPT? Is it generative adversarial network, GAN, right? That's another term. Like I have exceeded my knowledge on all of this at this point, but it is very confusing to what this specifically means.
I do have to say that these are like the worst possible names to expose to the lay public. Like, talk about leaky abstractions like ChatGPT and stapled, like all these things that really just, given how like this is kind of totally like, it's not even like tech bubble anymore, right? This is just like expanded into like my grandma and my aunts and like cousins and like, my cashier at the supermarket is talking about this. And so, it'd be nice to maybe have some better names for our non-tech brothers and sisters, but
I will say, I think it's better having the cashier ask you about generative AI than my cousin calling me asking about NFTs.
You know what? That's a fair point. Fair point, K-Ball.
All right, so we don't really have a definition yet of generative AI. I think, and there may not be a great definition. I think
I can try. I mean, but I don't. Oh, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'm. I don't consider myself an expert at all, to be very clear. But I think my interpretation of this would be that it's AI that can really, it breaks away from just traditional kind of pattern matching and neural net. Kind of, this is a cat, this is a dog, right? It can take a series of inputs, which would be prompts, and leverage its extensive, training with pattern matching of things, right? To kind of more creatively return outputs that aren't so, right? Like it's not so black and white anymore. Like the outputs are now, like there's an element of sophistication and creativity and like an elevation in the pattern matching that's really like, it gives you a thing that you can use, and a thing that's more kind of more useful to humans, really. That's like my like very simple definition. But
yeah, I think that gets pretty close to how I had been thinking about it, or how I sort of heard it, which is like a lot of the sort of last wave of AI was essentially classification, or what you called pattern matching, right? I look at a thing, maybe it's an image, maybe it's a pattern in data, maybe it's something else, and I make a judgment. This is an A, or this is a B. This is a click, or this is a robot. Like,
this is a street light.
This is a street light. This is, what are some of the other things that the stupid captchas show you instead of streetlights? Like whatever it is, like that sort of like pattern match classification is the last wave in some ways of AI. And what makes this new generative AI different is, instead of just a classification, it is creating something new. It is generating something that is more than an A, B, yes, no, label this, label that, but it is actually a label. Another way I've heard of it described is like, all of this current wave of generative AI could in some ways be thought of as translation. I'm translating from a language to a different language. I'm translating from a question to an answer. I'm translating from one image to a different related image, something like that. Whereas the previous ones were pattern matching, these ones are translating.
Yeah, I like that translating analogy, but I feel like, how do we explain translating analogy when it's like, okay, read this to me like a reporter. Like, it just feels so much more than just translation, because it's like it's able to kind of take all of these different inputs, like style of speech, content, like actual, themes, all these things, and really like put all of that together to spit out something that is like actually makes sense and is actually useful. So in that sense, it's like, I think I don't even know if they're words, right? K-ball, like maybe it's a futile task to even try to really define it because it's so new. We need like a new word, sort of like jiggy.
Well, so maybe what do we feel like has, like, it seems like we're in a qualitatively different place today than we were even a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's been like some big breakthroughs. So like, what have been the things, the changes or the breakthroughs that have been driving this qualitative shift?
Just real quick before anyone answers that, I appealed to authority as we do on this podcast. And I just asked the AI how it would describe itself. And it says that generative AI refers to a subfield of artificial intelligence focused on creating new and original content, such as images, music, text, and more, based on a set of rules or a model learned from data.
So maybe to tie those two together, I feel like some of the big breakthroughs were like we've shoved enough data into these models at this point that it has these kind of new, more logic-based possibilities of like it's not just translating English to French. It has a better understanding of what the concepts are within each of the statements. So it can do things like summarize a lot of text or turn it into something completely new. So a lot of it has to do with, you'll see, I think like words like transformer models and LLMs, so large language models. And I think those underlie like just how much information we've shoved into these models that we can now interact with.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing though. It takes a lot of data to do what it's doing. And that has been probably the prohibitive aspect of it in the past. And it's still like, only a few companies can actually do that kind of data processing. I couldn't do it, right? On my little computer here. But now like it's doing it in such a generic way, if that's the right term. Like it's so vast in the amount of data that it has that it can pretend to know about anything because it's tying all of these nodes together from the 375 billion parameters or whatever it has.
Can we break down what that means? Like what, I see these parameter numbers being thrown out. What does that mean?
I think we should just take this whole podcast and just like ask questions to ChatGPT and then just see what does it spit out,
I'm literally doing that.
Yeah. See, Nick's on it.
I have like a very high level understanding of what I think it is. So if we don't have a better answer, I can go with that. Like my sense is what these things, like one way we could model what these things are doing is like you have this massive linear algebra matrix essentially that is mapping from, okay, here's a set of words, tokens, or whatever. Here's what most likely should come next after that. And like, when you say there's like, I don't know what it is for ChatGPT, it's like 175 billion parameters. That means our matrix is 175 billion by 175 billion, like this matrix, and you throw stuff in, and that's how many different ways it can sort of potentially think about matching those. I don't know if that's exactly right, but that's like the mental model I have when we talk about these parameters is basically we're doing linear algebra, except at a scale that is just absolutely freaking bonkers.
Yeah, I'm not going to accurately depict how this is related, so I'm not going to say anything, but there's this concept of the latent space, which is like, where do all these concepts live from the way the model thinks about these things? And it's like massively multidimensional, right? Like if you think of a scatter plot, that's 2 dimensions. If you think of a 3D scatter plot, that's 3 dimensions. This is like, I don't know the order, but like millions of dimensions, right? So like it boggles the mind. Things stop making any sense. And I forget where I was going, but it was related to what you were talking about, K-Ball.
Nick, you look like you're about to share the ChatGPT summary of what it is.
A parameter is a value or set of values that defines the characteristics of a system, algorithm, or model. If that helps.
Well, so that strikes me like a lot of the AI generated text, which is it sounds official and says nothing.
Yes. That is one of the drawbacks.
Yeah. I kind of want to take a stab at like tying together a few things that I'm hearing from Amelia and K-Ball, like the Linalge analogy, and then the like this whole
Linalge. I love it.
Engineering school Linalge analogy, and then the what Amelia was talking about regarding like the dimensions and whatnot. So I think if we kind of take a few steps back and just think of like binary as a concept, right? So, everything can be represented in binary, and binary, inherently, like the color yellow on a screen, or a picture of a dog in a certain type of breed, right? Like they all have their own binary patterns that, like, with obviously margins of error, but like where you can match and create a pattern. And so if machines can understand ones and zeros, and they have these giant vectors that like say, okay, this sequence of ones and zeros represents a cat, the sequence of ones and zeros represents the color yellow, or whatever. Really, we take all of those vectors and then scale them up infinitely, right? To kind of say, not only does it understand all these different types of the categorization and the classification that like K-Ball was talking about earlier, but now it's able to also just understand how they relate and how they connect. And, and for me, like all of these things are just like reflective of like a human brain, right? Like it's just how the mind works, right? And really, like, this is kind of a culmination of what we've been really, I think, slowly working towards, right? Is to have like really sophisticated machines, and, all the content on the internet, everything that we're publishing is like, to train them and feed the machines, right? And help us with that creation of that more sophisticated tool. And so, it's incredibly exciting. And for me, this is like a pivotal, not just for me, everyone, right? It's a pivotal moment for us. I've been describing it to my family, like, this is like when the iPhone came out, where some people were really, really excited about it, and it started to immediately change people's lives. But then, like, look at 10 years, 15 years later, like how much has your life changed? Almost 20 years now, right? So I think we're at that kind of a milestone. And like, I think we're not even, like, the effects haven't hit us yet, but they will drastically over the next like couple of decades.
Hello, friends. This is Jared here to tell you about Changelog++. Over the years, many of our most diehard listeners have asked us for ways they can support our work here at Changelog. We didn't have an answer for them for a long time, but finally, we created Changelog++, a membership you can join to directly support our work. As a thank you, we save you some time with an ad-free feed, sprinkle in bonuses like extended episodes, and give you first access to the new stuff we dream up. Learn all about it at changelog.com/++. You'll also find the link in your chapter data and show notes. Once again, that's changelog.com/++. Check it out. We'd love to have you with us.
So, Amel, you were saying as we closed out the last session that this feels like a new beginning. There's a lot of stuff we're gonna see. We're only barely able to see what's coming. So let's actually talk a little bit about what is there today that listeners as developers could get their hands on and go. So first off, actually, maybe we mentioned there's only a few players that are able to train these massive models. So who are the players? What are the models that are out there for us to play with?
Well, the earliest one and probably most developer-oriented one is obviously GitHub Copilot. Before that, maybe, I don't know timelines, but there's also Tab 9, which is kind of in a similar vein to where it's trained on code to give you answers about code in a way that GitHub is as well, or GitHub Copilot.
So I think the like even bigger whale behind this whale is OpenAI, right? Like GitHub Copilot is using the Codex model from OpenAI, and OpenAI has all these different types of models that focus on generating code. There's some, like GPT-3 is more focused on generating text. They have, I think, another one focused on images, but I can't remember. So that's like definitely in my head, like that is the player that looms largest in this space. Also ChatGPT.
Is it DALL-E 2 for images?
Yeah, they do have DALL-E. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what ChatGPT was telling me. Real-time feedback. Yeah. But you have to always question, because that's the thing. Like, it is confidently incorrect, like, a lot of the time. So you have to question if it's actually giving you accurate information.
Well, and then there's also like Hugging Face is doing a whole bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Hugging Face is like a little bit like the GitHub for these models of like people hosting their own models and sharing them. And you can also, they have an API to run things on those models as well.
Yeah, and we have also can't forget GPT-0, which is like this product that came out to kind of help basically an AI recognize when content has been generated or created by another AI. Like, it's helping professors and anyone really who is looking to validate that the content that they've received was not indeed not created by a machine, and so that's really funny. It's like the battle of the AIs has already begun. Yeah, I mean, it's really cool. I think you were kind of spot on, Nick, earlier when you said that I think either Nick or Cable said not every company will have access to this. And I think the economic ripple that kind of creates is going to be very interesting, right? Because it's like sort of like the resource war. It's like, well, is your house by the water? Like, great. If not, so right. So it'll be interesting how that kind of shapes our economic landscape. But I think what's tremendously more exciting for me is that, similar to pivotal technologies like the iPhone, like, I think there will be a whole new class of companies and tools, and right, for every job that gets eliminated, there'll be n number more that get created. And I think it's just, how do we kind of shift people to kind of change their habits and change their mindsets to understand that, like, this can be an assistive tool for existing jobs. It can be assistive, and then for jobs that may be affected by this, how do we retrain and reskill, right?
So on that, what are things that people can do now to start playing with it? So I know, like, for example, I wanted to play with Stable Diffusion. And so I went to Hugging Face and I looked around and like clicked through a few, yes, I agree that I won't do this for whatever purpose, or I don't even remember what it was I agreed to. Agreeing to your license. And I didn't care that much because I just wanted to play with it and I wasn't going to do anything with it anyway. Downloaded stuff and started running things with Python. And that was sort of my road into this. What other kind of developer tools, libraries, APIs, et cetera, have you all used or seen that people could start just playing around with?
So I think most of the ecosystem lives in Python. So like there's an easy route they have like Google Colab notebooks where you get some amount of compute for free. So you can go and like train your own or fine tune your own model. So you could say like, here's some pictures of my face, make more pictures of my face, but like I'm a robot, that kind of thing. For me, a web developer, if I'm feeling lazy, the best thing is to just hit one of these APIs. Like OpenAI has like a really accessible API that you can just hit as an endpoint. And like every day it feels like there's more and more of these APIs that you can hit for this, which I appreciate because it's really easy for me to write like a JavaScript fetch call, right, from a web app.
Curious what kind of stuff you do with that, like through the API.
So going back to our definition of these Gen AIs, if you think about it, there's like one of the most common use cases is giving it text and getting text back. You can also give it text and get an image back. And now you can give it text and you can get music back. And like there's kind of this translation layer now of like you can give it an image and get text and then get music. So like there's this fun like building blocks where you could build on them, and it's getting more and more bonkers by the day. What I'm typically doing is like one thing I'm playing with is a writing tool that summarizes paragraphs so it's easier to read the flow. So you could send like, here's a paragraph of text, and then you can end it with like a little prompt of like, can you summarize the above paragraph in one sentence type thing? And like, there's this whole field now of like prompt crafting of like, what are the magic words you need to say to get what you want from these models?
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty funny when you saw people like sharing prompts back and forth, all these like cryptic strings of instructions for like, image generation and beyond also with ChatGPT. Yeah, it is interesting. I think that's also just an interesting thing because it also exposes people to like inputs as a concept and like, thinking about things as like, this is a box that has like these holes in it and you have to put certain things in the holes and like, and the box will spit things out on the other side. Like, I think that's so cool that everyone is kind of being exposed to params as a concept. but yeah, it's pretty cool. I think for me, like the only APIs that I've played around with are the OpenAI APIs that Amelia was talking about, and previous to this, TensorFlow.js, and a bunch of really cool things that are made available through Google Cloud and some, I think, what now feels like very rudimentary kind of workflows, compared to I think some of the newer abstractions that have come out recently. So I guess an open question that I have, as a consumer of this or potential consumer is really around it's hard to like how do you build a company around something like this, knowing that you can get rate limited and or knowing, right? Like I think understanding where the boundaries are would be helpful for me as a consumer. I think it's just such early days, but I think people are so excited, So I think those are some open questions that I have.
Well, and honestly, that's one of the reasons why the Microsoft OpenAI partnership makes so much sense, because when you're working with, like, people have a lot of doubts about building a company on random startups API. Nobody thinks twice about building a company using Microsoft or Amazon or Google Cloud. And each of those offers all sorts of packaged services beyond just, bare metal or virtual servers or things like that. So someone who might look at OpenAI and say, I don't know if I want to build a company on this third-party thing, will look at the wrapped API within Google or within Microsoft Cloud or Azure or whatever and be like, oh yeah, it's just another Microsoft service. No problem. I can build something on top of that.
Yeah, that definitely like gives it the feeling of it's going to stick around for a while, or it's going to be somewhat well supported and not constantly down or anything, so you can build around it. Still, when I use it as a consumer though, like some products that I use like already have pieces built in, like what you were saying, Amelia, with generation. Like I use a read later service that has this built-in AI thing now that I can read the document, and then I can tell it to ask me questions about the document to see if I like retained anything on it. I can also ask it to summarize it, or summarize it as a haiku, or do like all these different things. And like, that's really, really cool stuff. But at the same time, I'm like, this is cool. Can I like rely on this being here in a year? So I'm still in that, like, it's so new. I don't know if it's going to stick around. And I know that like, for example, ChatGPT just announced like their pro service. So maybe like it ties into that. Like, anything that's free that I'm not paying for, I'm always like skeptical of like, I'm obviously the product in this transaction, but how does it sustain itself?
Yeah. I mean, I've tried to use ChatGPT free about 5 times. It worked the first time, and every other time it said, oh, sorry, we have too much load. I cannot respond to you. Right? Like, okay, sure. Like, this is, I understand your early days. It's very, growing at ridiculous paces, but I'm not going to build something on top of that, something that reliable or unreliable.
Yeah, I mean, I hit those same issues when I was playing around with the API as well, for what it's worth. It's, it's just you're getting that message in a command line interface versus like, yeah.
I think this is one of the nice things about like Stable Diffusion is open source, essentially. So you could ostensibly spin up your own server locally or on AWS or Azure or something like that. And you don't have to worry about other people taking your data or it going down at any point. And like, you get to play with the model internals that way, but it's not easy at this point.
Well, for that one specifically, it kind of is. And I think it's because like, I think I've heard that Apple is like embracing it in a lot of ways for running on their various processors and systems. But there's like a GUI that you can download called Diffusion B, which is a full GUI. You don't have to write any code or anything. You install it as a regular Mac app, and it's doing all of the processing locally on your machine. So like, I actually have that and a CKPT file, I think checkpoint file. I don't know. That's trained on my face that I can add into that. And I'm comfortable doing that, knowing that it's not actually leaving my machine. I'm not training some model on my face outside of that. But it's really cool that it gives you that privacy while giving you pretty good results without having to share that with the rest of the world or be constantly connected.
Something you said there got me to an interesting thing, and something that was, I think it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around with this, which is you mentioned training it on your face. And that's one of the things that I think is most interesting about some of these models is that you can, they've been trained on many, many, huge amounts of data, but you can further train them on your own data and get much more specific types of results. They have sort of learned the right sets of parameters, and now you can add incremental data with labels that let you access it in useful ways. I think, Nick, you may have played with that more than I have. Do you want to, how did you go about that, and what did you get out of it with training it on your face, as you said?
I got hours and hours of enjoyment from it, which is the main thing. The images aren't super, some of them are really, really good. Some of them, in the moment, looked really good. And I look back later, I'm like, does that really look like me? But it's it was just endless fun. A friend and I did it together. We actually did it the I guess, cheating way, where I just used some service that created that checkpoint file for me instead of me setting up a whole Python environment and doing all of that, and then got the file back and started using it locally. But yeah, doing it together with a friend, and we were just kind of messing around and sending, I probably sent 500 images, and he did the same back and forth. It was just so fun. And I can see utility in it going forward, but I don't know, beyond a Mastodon avatar, I don't know what I'm going to use it for.
So just to break down a little bit what it is, you basically, you feed a bunch of pictures of yourself into the system. You label them as, this is Nick Nisi. This is Nick Nisi. This is Nick Nisi. And then now that it has learned, okay, Nick Nisi, and it has a bunch of different versions, you can ask it and you can say, hey, Nick Nisi as, what was the one you were sharing? Sexy lumberjack. Nick Nisi as, whatever. And it will generate an image that is you interpreted in that light. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And with the images that you upload, I gave it 30 images of myself, and you would think, oh, you need to have perfect images of your face in different directions and things like that. It actually works better if you have super varying backgrounds, not just a green screen behind you or something, but something where there's a lot of variation in it except for your face. It will learn your face much better and then use that going forward. And it can it puts my face in poses that were not in the image set that I gave it. So it can kind of figure that out, figures out how to put things together based on other inputs. And a lot of them, I was trying to be Wolverine or trying to be, other things. And it would kind of...
It's a picture into the inner id of Nick Nisi right there.
I did this hundreds and hundreds.
Nick wants to be a Wolverine sexy lumberjack.
I just did all of these comic book characters, but that one stood out in my mind particularly because that one, some of them look kind of like me. A lot of them look like me plus Hugh Jackman, kind of melded together. So it's you can definitely start seeing the cracks of how it's figuring out and trying to mesh these two faces together to make one. And sometimes it gets it better than other times, but it's a lot of fun.
So I think it's super cool that you did that locally, Nick, because in all my past experience, everything has to kind of go through. There's a big round trip to the cloud when doing anything with ML, including just working with Google Assistant. If you're setting up a Google Assistant or Alexa app, when you're developing locally, there's round trips to the cloud to go and train your data. And I was at Google I/O one year and got to see these big GPUs, the big units that they have in their data centers that actually, are used for compute. And these things are massive, right? I can understand why that lives in a data center, not in your house. But that's very cool to hear that okay, things are, getting sophisticated enough in their compute such that they can be leveraged, on a quote unquote standard developer machine. That's really neat.
Yeah. And the images that I was generating they look amazing to me. They were a lot of fun. They're not sometimes I have like 6 fingers, or I have like just a weird third arm somewhere. Like it messes up quite a lot. And there are tools like you can like put it in there and like tell it to in paint and like draw over that stuff and do all of that. But it's, it is limited to the model that I have locally and the processing power that I have as well. Whereas like you see other things like Midjourney, I think that's one that you interface completely through Discord on, which is really cool. And the images that come out of that are like astoundingly better, in my opinion. But it's also, going out to some supercomputer somewhere and not just my little Mac Studio here.
Well, and I saw, actually, we recently talked to Fred K. Schott about Astro, and I saw they did a similar thing where they trained a language model built on top of GPT-3 on their docs for Astro. And now they have this little AI bot that can tell you all about Astro. And this leads me to start wondering, like, and maybe we should come back to this in the next segment, but like, what are the opportunities here today, and where do we see them coming in the next couple of years? So I guess before we get there, gotchas on using the technology as it is today, right? So Amel, you mentioned one. For a lot of times you're going back and forth from the cloud, right? Especially if you're using these APIs. And we talked about how flaky the APIs can be. Any other gotchas or challenges y'all have run into trying to develop with these first generation generative AI tools?
I'll say that I have not really played with the APIs that much, but using like ChatGPT as a more intelligent rubber duck for me to kind of bounce ideas off of, like you have to be very, very skeptical of anything that it gives you, because it will confidently tell you to do something this way. And then like, I just got into like a pattern with it where it would tell me to do something. It would like actually spit out code. I'd use the code and I'd report back the error. I would just like copy and paste the error that I would get back into ChatGPT, and it'd go, "Oh, you're correct. I was wrong." And then it'll change it. And it got to the point where it was like, "Oh, that's incorrect. Let me show you this." And it would give me the exact same code again and just kind of got stuck in a loop. So it's like, that's where you start seeing the cracks of like, it's not actually that intelligent, but it's better than a blank slate in a lot of ways.
It turns out the Turing test is the wrong test, right? Like the Turing test, can this fool a human? Well, it has learned to confidently generate bullshit.
Oh.
Any other challenges or gotchas y'all want to share?
I guess, yeah, I think just the pipelines and tooling and, just the whole ecosystem around end-to-end kind of local development and setup and deployment. And like, I think like that's still being fleshed out. I know there's a ton of startups that have come up in this area recently that are kind of focused on pipelines, but I think it still feels a little janky and distorted. And it's a very much choose your own adventure based on your stack, skills, ability, what services you're using and what tools you prefer and what cloud provider you want to work with, So it's, I think that's something that's still a little, it's bleeding edge, and that edge is it's still a little rough,
All right, well, let's hop back in and talk about what types of problems we think generative AI is good for today, is not good for today, and where we see it going in just the next even 6 months to a year, because this field is moving freaking fast. So shall we start with Amelia?
So I've been following the space for a while, and it's been really interesting to see it develop. Like, first you have this breakthrough in technology, and like it's the like any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Like, we don't understand what its limitations are, so we think it can do anything. So then people are making these like ridiculously overreaching products on top of it that everyone gets all excited about, but they're like flashy demos, right? And so like I feel like I'm watching the ecosystem slowly start understanding like what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks. And one of the interesting things is this like very important thread around security and like ethical use of these things. Like, what makes sense for us to build for humanity. And there's this interesting distinction between like machines and tools that I always come back to and think about of like, we don't want to replace humans, but these new models are amazing at doing drudge work, like stuff I do not want to do, like writing tests. I don't want to write tests. Can the AI help me with that kind of thing? Or how can I use it as a tool so I'm like kind of working at a control board with like sliders and dials and not just like doing a slot machine thing with like, you know, do this and then do that and like do all my work for me. So I don't know. I think about that a lot.
I like that. It is kind of like a slot machine right now.
Well, and that ties into something that I've thought about a lot of this, which is like, I think it's still at a place where most of the key value props are still going to be human in the loop, right? You need, it's great for writing some tests or some boilerplate code or for summarizing a paragraph or generating a first draft of something. But it is also so confident in its own baloney that you need a person in there checking it, validating it, improving it, most likely. So I think as a tool, as a part of a creative process to get past the blank page problem or to scaffold or boilerplate or something like that is phenomenal. To create a polished or complete project, I'd be pretty hesitant.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like if we had to list out like what are these AIs good at and what are humans better at, there's like they're very quick, right? Like if I asked a human a question, they're not going to answer as quickly as ChatGPT can answer. And they're very confident, but potentially wrong, right? So like as a brainstorming assistant, they're amazing. But as like, I don't know, anything where the accuracy matters, like Nick, you were talking about it, generating code, there needs to be a way to quickly evaluate that. Like you just can't trust it at this point, right?
Yeah, I have to say, for me, it's been like, I'm always fascinated at how we're so, like our immediate response is always like, oh my God, like we're going to be replaced. I really do think we need to lean into this fear a little bit more and just like say, where is this coming from? Right. Because like the human brain is like, there's nothing that is ever going to replace this thing, especially when we're able to leverage these tools to like solve higher level problems and kind of get away from the rudimentary menial stuff that you all were just referring to, like boilerplate code and like just simple stuff. And so that's something that I think we need to kind of socialize a little bit more, but it's a completely understandable and like natural fear, so
kind of related. It reminded me of this Twitter thread I saw of pictures from orchestra players striking against like they found out new technology to play sound along with the silent movies. And like I had no idea that was like a controversial topic when it came out. But if you think about it, they had these live orchestras to play at the same time as a movie. And that job is just like completely replaced for better or worse. So there's a lot of interesting parallels to like jobs will change, but in what way?
Yeah. We still have horses.
We still have horses.
I think that I don't know, this is all fascinating and like it is a really good, it's what we want a personal assistant to be, right? In terms of like bouncing ideas off of, summarizing things for us. If I was working on a logo for my company and I'm no designer, but I have an idea, or I don't even have an idea. Maybe I can try and describe what I want and get it to spit out something super rough that I would take to an actual designer to kind of polish up and make into something real. Like those are all tools that you can use and that are becoming more broadly available to everyone. And that is the fascinating part of it. K-Ball, you mentioned in the last segment about Astro's docs. Like if you think about Astro is a difficult thing to potentially search for. And so having a language model that's trained specifically on how to use Astro, the web framework, and it's not going to tell you about like the Houston Astros or astrology or something else. Like it's going to tell you exactly what you want based on the framework, which you're trying to get questions on. That's a fascinating use case. And the fact that they could just like spin that up, I don't know how long it took them, but I assume it was relatively quick. And, what other things could you build up? Like, could I make a language model that knows and like train it on, our company Confluence, and then just be able to ask it questions instead of having to go search through that minefield of junk. Like that is a fascinating prospect and something that you could potentially do today, right? It's just really cool. The one question I have though, as we like start to adopt this stuff is like, we mentioned that it has so many billions of parameters, hundreds of billions of parameters right now. Where does it go from here? What is ChatGPT 4, 5, 6? Does adding, going from 200 billion parameters to 400 billion, does that give me double the intelligence or double the, however you want to quantify it? Or are we going to reach some kind of plateau where it's just not going to get any smarter with current technology, or because of some like ridiculous compute limits that only they will hit?
I mean, one thing I'd love to see is thinking about the different types of aspects that go into intelligence. Like if you think about human intelligence, there's this great book that talks about system 1 and system 2, right? We have these two different, it's Thinking Fast and Slow is the book. And talks about how our brains have two different systems. One is a very fast pattern matching type of thinking, and one is a slower, logical, careful form of thinking. And that slower, logical, careful form is much more effortful, but it's what we use when we do mathematics or we do logical reasoning or we do other things like that. When we look at these generative AIs, neural nets, like all of the sort of recent wave of artificial intelligence, they all map pretty closely to that system 1, like fast processing, pattern recognition, mapping patterns. But what they don't have is what humans can do, which is we'll do that pattern recognition and we'll do a slower validation. Does this actually match? I mean, sometimes we do. A lot of times we don't. And we just like have that first gut and then we have our biases and all these other things that play in. But we have the capacity to assess that first gut response and say, is that right? What do I know about this situation that would let me validate that this thing is even like plausible, but that my gut reaction is plausible? I don't see anything like that in the AI space right now. And what I would love to see is exploration on how do we take these generative outputs, which may improve as we add parameters or whatever, but that like system 1, gut response, fast processing, pattern recognition approach, and apply some way to validate it.
So first of all, that's a great question. Also, Nick, you asked another great question. Like, so now I have like these two great questions that are stacked in my brain. But to like, so just to kind of start with you, K-Ball, just not that I'm even going to attempt to answer Nick's question, but to start with you, I'm just curious. There's a few things that are kind of abstracted away for us when we're looking at these models. And I think one important thing is like the confidence metric, And so if you're working with these tools as a developer, you can set your thresholds for like how, what your confidence bar, should be in order before you return data, right? Like, or I think it would be great to expose those metrics to users, to end users potentially, so that like they can discern, hey, like what the confidence score and what thresholds were used when creating this, right? And I think for people who are curious to kind of use things that are generated by AI for, important work, like I think, that's kind of like a make or break metric, right? Like a confidence score and or just understanding what the thresholds and inputs are, just kind of like peeling the layer back a little bit from just the answer, but like what are the parameters and like bounds around the answer. I think something like that could be helpful. And that's where your analytical, reasonable human brain could come in and say like, okay, I'm going to now, based on a wider picture, make a decision on how I want to use this output,
Do we have that level of threshold confidence in or discernment in a large language model? Because like I know that was one of the challenges with neural nets, right? Like a neural net, you have no idea how it got to your answer. It's not like another machine learning technique I love is random forest, right? And there it'll actually give you like, here's how we got here. Here's the decision points. Like you can introspect the model in a way that most, at least neural nets, did not expose. And I don't know, do large language models have a way to introspect them?
There's a lot of active research on like increasing observability into these LLMs. As far as I understand, we're just picking away the layers at the surface. And then the other kind of funny thing is if you do the naive thing and just ask it, how confident are you about this answer? It is almost always very confident. like yes, I'm certain this is correct, right? That part doesn't work, unfortunately.
And that feels like something that is going to have to improve, or it's going to have to know what its confidence level is on things. And it's not something that we're, as me on the outside of OpenAI, not internal, like OpenAI or ChatGPT is trained up through 2021. What happens when it starts getting trained on data that it generated, and how's that feedback loop going to perpetuate some major confidence about something completely incorrect, or is it going to be able to work against that? I'm sure like they've got it figured out. I have no idea what I'm talking about here, but
I mean, even training on non-OpenAI stuff, right? If they're training on internet content, like there's a reason there's a famous comic that says, "Oh, somebody's wrong on the internet." Like,
yeah,
there's a lot of wrong content out there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there is. But I think that for me, this kind of comes back to like a wider point. I've always thought for a long time that like, hey, this explosion of ChatGPT and generative AI is fairly new, but we've been using machine learning in products and technologies for a little while now, in lots of different ways, whether it's a recommendation engine or like a natural language processing or a chatbot or whatever it is. Like there's all kinds of machine learning in products that you use every day, and I've always thought that like, hey, it would be really great to educate users around how their models are trained, right? Like, and that goes back to Amelia's observability, right? Like knowing what type of data was used to train it, and giving people facts on like how this information was curated. Like, is there some way that we could kind of similar to like a Chrome Web Vitals, kind of these three simple metrics? Is there kind of a simple way of kind of communicating to average people? Hey, by the way, this data came from a machine learning model, and and these are the metrics, and like this is how well the model scored on diverse content, and like here's was this human assisted or not? Like there's ways that I feel like it would be nice to expose that. Again, like that's does the average person need to know? Probably not, but should they want to know? Like, should they have access to that answer? I think yes, right? And so
yeah, that brings up a really good point as like this starts getting proliferated into other products and everything. Like so far, seemingly OpenAI or ChatGPT, I'm talking about ChatGPT specifically, I guess, but it seems like trying really hard not to introduce bias, or it tries to not step into topics that it thinks are problematic, for lack of a better word. But it's something that we have to constantly be vigilant on, as like, OpenAI does, but plus us as a public who is starting to trust and adopt these technologies, because the old ML models that are out there and being used today are ruining people's lives constantly, in determining credit scores and determining housing, all of that stuff. Like there's a documentary on Netflix, I think it's called Coded Bias, that talks all about that. And, that could have its own level of bias in it as well. But there's bias in these systems, and it's trained on the biases of us as humans, because we are biased on a lot of things. And we need to be vigilant to make sure that as these get better and better, they don't get better and better at ruining people's lives, and in fact go the opposite way.
Yeah, and Coded Bias is great. Everyone should watch it. And the person behind that is someone at MIT that I've had a chance to meet a few times. She's this brilliant researcher. Her name is Joy. She founded the Algorithmic Justice League, which is based out of the MIT Media Lab. And it talks a lot about how algorithms can exponentiate systemic injustice, right? Like just it's an algorithm, so it's going to exponentiate, right? So if it's bias, then it's going to be really, really biased, in terms of its impact. So thank you so much for bringing up that really good point, Nick.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I'd love to close with just one thing from each of the panelists about something you're really excited about seeing come out of AI broadly or generative AI specifically, something you're looking forward to, whether it's on short time horizon, medium time horizon. Let's not go too far out there because then it gets really speculative, but something that you think is likely to happen and that you're excited to see.
As someone who thinks about interfaces a lot, I have a very biased response of I'm very excited for us to have a more nuanced understanding of what these are good at, what they're bad at, and how we can interact with them, and get over the like raw text is the right way to interact with these models. I don't think prompt crafters are the magicians of the future. I think we're going to build these like really interesting interfaces that have clever ways of, I can draw not with a brush, but with a brush that makes this, like paint a tree here or make this more X or change this in this way. And like, we'll give artists and developers ways to kind of like sculpt their craft like clay, as opposed to like I'm changing the text characters on my screen. So that is what I'm most excited about.
I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because that's kind of exactly what I was thinking. And in terms of like, the technology is coming, it's been announced, and there's like a wait list for it that I'm definitely on. But like, I think back to the 2008 movie Iron Man, where Tony Stark's in his basement and he's designing the Iron Man suit with Jarvis, and he's like, spinning things around. He's not coding. You don't ever see him at a keyboard coding things. He's like playing with these models, but he's mostly talking to Jarvis and telling him, oh, let's decrease this by that. And slap a little Cadillac red paint in there. And Jarvis is immediately thinking, Cadillac red, that's paint. Okay, he wants it painted this way, and like figures it out and kind of helps him. So it's this assistive tool where he's designing it, but he's not coding anything. He's not like engineering anything. That's all happening by his helpers, the machines, the dum-dum robot, all of that. And like, it feels like we're on the precipice of potentially getting, a very early model of that relatively soon, which is pretty cool. Like just being able to have a conversation and then get an output that's based on that. That is like amazing, and somewhere I hope that we get to soon.
Yeah. Plus $1 million on that. My answer is going to be very similar, but with a web slant, which is, I really think we have the opportunity to like tremendously scale up our ability to create better user experiences in the products that we build on the web. And so I think whether it's accessibility, design, content management, and creation, you name it, right? The whole gamut. I think every company just got a whole staff, new staff members that can do XYZ. And so I hope we can kind of start leveraging, this technology to do more good. I think that's my hope.
Yeah, I love that. I'm hopeful that I think it's similar to what Amelia was saying, that we will figure out soon what this is good for and what it isn't, because I think a lot of people are trying to do stuff with it that it is not at all suited for. People are promising the world, there's hyperbole, there's all of this mess, and it's going to cause a lot of harm. And this is a tremendously powerful technology. It has the ability to dramatically improve our productivity and likely a number of other things, but we need to figure out what it is and what it isn't.
Sounds like an NFT.
It was only mentioned twice in this entire podcast. I mean, that's like, honestly, it's impressive. I mean,
I saw somebody trying to spin that like, AI, generative AI and the crypto wave are made for each other because of this, that, the other. I'm like, no, they're not. No, this is a useful technology that we're figuring out the use for. That is a technology that people have been trying to figure out a use for the last 15 years and consistently failed.
Well, I was wondering, was that pitch immediately followed by, and so invest in this coin?
Almost certainly. Here's how you get it. Yeah. All right. I think that if we've circled back to NFTs and crypto, we have run this topic into the ground. Thank you all for joining me today. This has been fun. And we'll catch everyone next week.
Changelog Plus members, stick around for a quick after show where Amel applies thinking fast and slow logic to developer estimates. If you aren't on the plus bandwagon yet, hop on at changelog.com/plus. Make the ads disappear, get bonuses like this, and directly support our work on JS Party. Once again, that's changelog.com/plus. Thanks again to our partners Fastly and Fly. Check them out at fastly.com and fly.io. And to Breakmaster Cylinder for keeping us supplied with the best beats in the biz. That's all for now, but we'll party with you again next week.